I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Beth Ewaskowitz is a native of Boulder, Colorado, currently lives in Erie with her husband and her son. Last year, she and her family were unexpectedly drawn into the discussion surrounding proximity of schools and homes to fracking operations following VOC blood testing on their son. Today, she shares her experience as both a mom and a scientist, working to understand the potential health implications to her family. Dr. Beth Ewaskowitz.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk to you, to be able to share my story. I'm a pharmacologist. I have my doctorate in pharmacology and neuroscience from the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, now Anschutz. So I had to approach this situation. Sometimes I had my mom hat on. Sometimes I had to have that science hat on. And you'll hear the emotion come through. I'm working on it. But this is a hard story, and one that I'm glad I can be able to share with you. First thing I want to be able to do is a disclaimer and be able to say I have no material interest in any drilling operations, any of these lab testing facilities, anything of that nature. My goal here this morning is really just to be able to share my story, to be able to talk about some blood tests I received on my son and the response that the state had for it, and really the process that we're still going through to try and understand how to understand what those health implications are for our family. So the learning objectives, what we'll go through here today is we'll talk about some of the differences between the Genova Diagnostics blood test that I had run and the CDC method that they use for the same sort of a diagnostic test, and how those differences may impact the accuracy of that result. I'll also talk a little bit about CLIA. That's the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, and that is something that's required for all clinical diagnostic labs. And with CLIA, there's also CLEP, and CLEP is out of New York State, and we'll talk a little bit about what CLEP certification also means for diagnostic tests. And last, we'll look at just a few other methods that are available for diagnostic testing of VOCs in a patient's body. So I thought we'd start here quickly with a matrix of information, sort of a way I can categorize my thoughts here on the talk. There's the things that you know and the things you don't know. That's pretty easy. So there's the things I knew about fracking, and we'll go over that a little bit. There were some things that I didn't know, but I knew where to find the information, and I knew I could educate myself as I needed to be able to find some of that. The problem that we ran into is all the things that I didn't even know I didn't know, and that's what brought me here today. And as a silver lining to all of that, there's also the things that you didn't know that you really do. That's what makes this part easier, okay? So let's look at my family story. I live in Erie, Colorado, and I knew that Erie was pockmarked with fracking wells, and that I didn't really want my family living anywhere near them. This image here was taken, it's a screenshot that I took in 2012. One thing that you'll see with the style of fracking that was done at the time is that's a single wellhead, and they would do sort of a star shape out from it. So the blue circle here is a 1 mile radius around the house that we were living in at the time. So you can see it was all around us. And when we were looking to move, my husband wanted to move, I started eliminating all kinds of subdivisions and saying, can't live here, there, and anywhere. Partly because one of the things that they had started doing is this process of this linear fracking where it covers nearly every square foot underneath your house. And they would come in and do that first in a subdivision, and then they build the houses on top of it. So I started looking at this going, well, we're not going to live here, there, and anywhere else. So you can see that the style of fracking had changed. This was in 2017. And we selected a new home on the Boulder County side of Erie. So there has been a 5-year moratorium on fracking in Boulder County. So at least there wasn't as much on Boulder County side. It's not to suggest that the air quality stops at the county line. But we chose a new home on the Boulder County side of Erie, and then this showed up. We were buying a new construction home, so there was a period of time before we'd move in. We signed the contracts in March, and then this shows up in, I think it was June of that year, saying that the neighborhood school that my son would be assigned to was potentially not going to be built because of the proximity it is to an existing wellhead. And I looked at that and went, for everything I've tried to do to try and keep us further from some of these fracking wells, and now we've got a school that is going in that is too close to a fracking well. So it was one of these things where there was a lot of discussion between the neighbors, the state, the school board, and in the end, they grandfathered it in, and they decided to waive the setback regulations, and they built the school. Which left me also wondering, what's the point of a regulation if you're going to waive it when it's inconvenient? So let's look at this well. This is a screenshot off of the COGCC website. It has a really handy tool on there also where you can get measurements. So you can click on the wellhead and then on the school building, and it'll tell you exactly down to the feet how far that thing is away from the school. So this well is owned by Noble Energy, and subsidiaries of Anadarko own the surface rights for it and have expressed intent to refrac this well in the near future. The proximity, it's about 600 feet from the school building right now. It's about 200 feet from the school fields that you see over here. So there's the school fields, and then this is 600 feet to the school building. What's interesting is when you're talking about a liquor store, the requirement is it has to be 1,000 feet from the school property, the boundary, okay? When you're talking about marijuana institutions, companies, they have to be 1,000 feet from the school property. And then when you talk about an oil and gas situation, it's 1,000 feet currently from the school building, which means all the other areas that the children are playing in and everything else are in that intermediate area zone, okay? So I looked at this, and so this kind of fit in the things that I didn't even know, or that I knew I didn't know. Okay, I could find out a little bit more about information about this well. I could try and understand a little bit more what I was dealing with. And I decided, how am I going to make a decision about this school? Am I going to let my son go to this school or not? Am I going to pull him out of the school when they start drilling this well? How am I going to make that choice? So like I said, I'm a scientist and a mom, and I was wearing both of these hats, and I decided I was going to try and not be overreactive. I was going to try and gather some data, make a thoughtful, well-informed decision. So this is me trying to operate in sort of an information gathering situation, okay? So I knew about this diagnostic test from Genova Diagnostics. And this is a volatile solvents test that is done on whole blood. And my plan was I was going to have my son tested right now, establish what his baseline level of exposure is. And then once they began to drill that well, I was going to retest him again. I hadn't truly thought through when would that be, how often would that be, and what amount over baseline increase would I feel okay with or not okay with to make that decision to pull him from the school. I hadn't gotten any of that yet. But what I thought I'd do is at least get the baseline, and I'd figure it out as I went. So that's what I did, and it was actually a year ago this week when I had the blood test done on my son. Sorry. Okay. And the data comes back from Genova, reported against the NHANES Fourth National Report for human exposure to environmental chemicals. So they're using CDC data tables to be able to report this information. And this is my son's test report. So I've scrubbed his name off the top, but that's the test report. And what the results were is that he was in the 79th percentile for exposure to benzene, 85th percentile for exposure to ethylbenzene, sorry, and 81st percentile for exposure to O-xylene. This is not what I thought I'd see. I was expecting trace levels, 0 even. He's 6. A 6-year-old shouldn't have exposure to this at all, right? And what do I do with this when we're looking at the 80th percentile in exposure? That only means there's 20 people that are higher than him. And he's higher than 80 other people. All right, we've now moved into the realm of things I didn't even know I didn't know. Because now, what I've got to figure out is, where's this coming from? Well, there's a couple of places. You can look at indoor air quality. If you're a smoker, you're exposed to a lot of these chemicals, or if you're around secondhand smoke, that would be the case. Our family is a non-smoking family, and he's never around smokers, so that wasn't a possibility. We're in a new construction home. A lot of these construction materials can off-gas different VOCs, so that's a possibility. He's also in a new construction school, so again, there's a possibility. And there's outdoor air exposure as another possibility. Proximity to highways or traffic exhaust is one of these. Now, we are in Erie. We're about maybe 10 miles from I-25. So we're not right next to a major artery for that. We're closer to cows in Erie than anything else. And there's also proximity to gas stations. Probably more so this would be if it's like a gas attendant that is helping pump the gas all day long and is exposed to a lot of these fumes. So what I decided to do is I'm at least going to rule out whether indoor air quality is part of the problem. Okay, so I contacted RDS Environmental, and I had different environmental tests set in the home to be able to evaluate, is any of this coming from the house? Because I can try and fix that, or I could move. Right? So these are the test reports. I had an organic vapor test run, and you can see I've circled the results here. What I've called out here is what's in the smaller text down below. The U.S. Green Building Council recommends a maximum of 500 microgram per meter cubed in an enclosed environment for organic vapors, and we're at 42. So we're well below even the green building guidelines. And this is a list of all of the different chemicals that were evaluated. While I was at it, I also did formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is not part of what I received for blood test results, but I was thinking, as long as we're looking at air quality in this new construction home, let's also check formaldehyde, which is in a lot of floorings, carpets, it can be in a lot of paints, as well as any of the pressed board kind of shelving from IKEA, things like that. So I also did the test here for formaldehyde, and I've called that one out also. California Air Resources recommends no higher than 0.05 ppm, and we were at, I think it was 0.036. So again, we're well below even what California will say for guidelines for a house. So I can rule out new construction home. The school wouldn't let me do that type of testing, so there's no way to be able to look at that. But the other thing that's in there is also proximity to industrial operations, fracking as possibility. And that is when I discovered how many wells we live by. As hard as I'd been trying to work on making sure we were not near wells, holy cow, had I not done my homework. This is a screenshot from the COGCC website showing the maps. The light blue circle is a half-a-mile radius around our home, the school, the Erie Rec Center, and the soccer fields where my son plays soccer. The dark blue circles is a 1 mile radius, and I sat down and counted. And what I came up with is that we live and play within a 1 mile radius of 158 fracking wells. Oh, God. 72 of which are currently active. That means they're currently in flowback stages. They're currently pulling materials out of the ground and back up. That means that the remainder of those are either currently shut in or abandoned. And a shut-in well, this is another thing that I didn't even know I didn't know. Once they come in and frack this well once, that's not done. I thought that was done. I thought you came in, you drilled the well, you fracked it, you got it, you left. They'll actually come back and re-frack a well 10, 15 times or more over the course of several decades. It's not gone. And so what they do is they do a temporary seal at the surface level of that well so they can come back later and do it again. So that's what the remainder of those wells are doing, is they're sort of in that interim period before they can come back and frack these things again. All right. To give you some perspective about sort of Air quality doesn't stop at the county line. This orange line here is County Line Road, and so this is Weld County and Boulder County. You can certainly see the effect that a 5-year moratorium had on Weld County and Boulder County. And those yellow circles are the same circles that were on that previous screen, showing the 1-mile radius around my home, the school, Erie Rec Center, and the soccer fields. So if we're looking at ambient air quality as a possible consideration, I mean, I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from. I have a preponderance of evidence that would suggest this is a distinct possibility right here, and air quality does not stop at the county line. So what did I do? I filed a report with the COGCC, and then I went down to Denver and testified in front of the COGCC meeting. It's an interesting experience when you do that. You get 3 minutes to talk, and you're not even sure that you were heard. And at the end of your 3 minutes, they don't even say, thank you for talking. They just call the next person. So you're not even sure that you were heard. I presented this story and what I just shared with all of you at that meeting. Channel 7 News was at that meeting, and when she saw that testimony right there, she actually pulled me just right outside the doors here, and so that's where we ended up part of that news piece that aired later that night. The Colorado Department of Public Health, they did follow up on my report. One of their immediate questions or statements is that my test results didn't match their air quality monitoring. And the implication in there that I found annoying was that their data was right and mine was wrong. And frankly, I kind of feel like if we're presenting information that looks like physical harm to someone, my data wins until you can show me otherwise. What they did is they did follow up, and then as we continued to talk for several days, they took issue with the diagnostic method that was used by Genova Diagnostics. And at first, I felt as though maybe they were trying to just poke holes in this, find some way to explain it and make it go away, discard it, and make it an irrelevant result. So let's look at Genova Diagnostics and their test method, and so we can really consider what is it that the CDPHE is talking about here. So they're reporting their test results against the NHANES data tables that's generated by the CDC, and they are working with, mostly, we'll talk about it, the CDC Method. So the CDC Method is actually available online, and you can find this. It's a 53-page document that you can sit down and read the exact SOP of how they're going to run this particular test. So I call out a couple of things here that were of interest. They request that samples be shipped within 1 to 2 days of collection, and that they be analyzed within 2 to 3 weeks of collection, so that you can limit any of this volatile solvent leaving solution, skewing your results. The other thing that they comment on is that they feel that the rubber stopper in this vacutainer tube has a potential to off-gas VOCs to an extent that they feel that there's a need for a special cleaning method, and we'll talk about that here in a moment, to be able to prevent some of that sample contamination. This is one of the tables that is in that report, and these are analytes that they feel they have detected, or these are analytes that they have detected coming off of these rubber stoppers. And you'll see listed in here is benzene, ethylbenzene, xylene. Okay, so something to think about. Does Genova use this same method? Mostly. They use the same detection method, GCMS, gas chromatography mass spec. The blood collection time frame was done in the same guidelines as the CDC. In our case, the sample was completed within 11 days from when it was drawn. But the pre-treatment of the vacutainer tubes is not the same, and that's where the CDPHE is pulling this out, saying we're not sure how we feel about the accuracy of this test. This is excerpt from an email that I received from Dr. Amy Brewer. She is the CSO at Genova Diagnostics and also the laboratory director. And what she says in here is that every lot of blood collection tubes is tested for possible contamination. So they receive a lot, they test several of the test tubes there. If that lot appears to be high in just general VOC within these sterile vacutainers, then that lot is not included in any of the kits that they send out. But then they said we test using both water blanks and blood from volunteers known to be exposure-free. And I wasn't really sure how I felt about that. I think my thesis advisor would tell me to think long and hard about what type of a control that we're really looking at with that. Who truly is exposure-free? Who are these people? So it's a question. And I do feel that that's a valid question for the CDPHE to have raised, but it shouldn't stop there. It's not like, okay, well, on we go. Because I still have these test results saying 80th percentile for exposure on my 6-year-old son. And I still have to make sense of this. I still have to figure out where am I going to go with this one. So how big of an issue is this rubber stopper? Well, the CDC says it's a big enough issue that it merits a 3-week process of soaking these rubber stoppers in methanol, vacuum baking them, and then tube re-evacuation and reassembly to put them into any of their test kits. So the CDC says it's a big deal. Genova, like we just saw, they pre-screen their lots using water blanks and blood from healthy, exposure-free volunteers. So I got the other side over here, right? I spoke with Dr. Greg Dooley. He is a professor here at CSU in the Environmental Sciences group, and he has done blood VOC work in his research laboratories here. And so I spoke with him a little bit to try and understand what's his take on this spectrum of what I'm looking at here. And he said he never had an issue with VOC contamination from the rubber stoppers in the work that he did. He did say that he was doing smaller samples, so it was likely that he had a single clean large lot of tubes, and so he didn't see really lot-to-lot variability in the type of work that he was doing. He also said that he would expect that the Genova laboratory director would have a protocol in place, a corrective action process, if they did see high VOC in a water blank control as they're analyzing these tests. So, to be able to say it's very likely that as a diagnostic lab that they have that in place. But then he made one other comment that I found really kind of interesting and really one worth thinking about, and that is, these are organic solvents. They are hydrophobic. They don't really want to be in solution, okay? So he felt that really the limited solubility of this means the potential that any contamination from the rubber stopper going into the blood solution is fairly small. And that maybe more likely what is happening, or a larger issue, would be that these VOCs are trying to leave solution and come out. And in that case, then, underreporting of results is maybe more a likely consideration. Oh, that felt so much better to hear that. And I still don't know what to do with these results. So here's the thing, though. You're thinking, this is a clinical diagnostic test. Shouldn't this thing be validated in order to be sold? I mean, shouldn't they know how the test performs? And that brings me here to the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, CLIA. It's administered by the CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. It's part of a 1988 amendment to the Public Health Services for certification and oversight of clinical laboratory testing. It applies to all testing of human subjects in the United States with the exception of research. Okay, so if you're a clinical diagnostic lab in the United States, you are required to have CLIA certification in order to operate. The objective of CLIA is to establish quality standards, okay, for laboratory testing and handling of all of these specimens. But really what it's looking at is, are there SOPs in place for how you've trained laboratory personnel, how you have standardized the instrument, maintenance of the instrument, sample receipt, sample tracking, all of these things. CLIA, interestingly, doesn't really say anything about method validation. But that brings me over here to CLEP. And New York State has a different program in place, Clinical Laboratory Evaluation Program. And you can find all of their documents also on the website. This is their large handout guide as far as what you're all going to need to be able to submit for CLEP. certification. And I'm familiar with both of these. I used to work for a diagnostic lab in Boulder. We maintained our CLIA certificates. Having a CLIA certificate is a badge of pride. It's one where you look at and you go, we've got our CLIA, and we can show it to any customer, anyone who has a question about it. Obtaining CLEP, which I also helped walk this company through in trying to obtain CLEP certification on their diagnostic test, is a huge process. The requirements for CLEP is they're either the same as or more stringent in most cases than CLIA, and it provides oversight to laboratories and whether they are in the state of New York or not in the state of New York. In order to test any clinical specimen from any resident in the state of New York, even if that sample is sent to Georgia, that laboratory in Georgia has to have CLEP certification in order to be able to process the sample from any patient in New York State. So New York is trying really hard to protect their citizens and make sure that this diagnostic test is a valid, solid diagnostic test. The objective of CLEP is that they seek to ensure the accuracy and reliability of results. What's that sound like? And I've worked through this process for CLEP certification. They're looking at accuracy, precision, ruggedness, intra-operator, inter-operator. That's a validation protocol. That's what CLEP is. And it's a very difficult process to be able to work through. So then the question is, what certifications does Genova hold for this diagnostic test? CLIA, yes. They're a clinical diagnostic lab. All clinical diagnostic labs in the United States are required to have CLIA. CLEP, no. How do I know that? Down at the bottom of this website here in the small text, called it out for you in a red box here, it says it's not available in New York. So they don't have CLEP certification, and the question then is why? You know, CLIA is not intended to be a stopping place for any diagnostic lab test. It starts as a research diagnostic lab test. It moves into a commercial setting. The intent is that it continues to progress into a validated state. And you've got this sort of CLIA land that you can live in for a while that is going to allow you to collect enough samples that you can build your validation packet. So when we look at the Genova website, or when I did, I can see that there are other tests on their website that are available in New York. So that tells me that they are familiar with CLEP certification. They know that that's necessary for selling it in New York. So do they just not want to invest the money or the time into doing that for this particular diagnostic test? They are losing revenue because they can't receive clinical diagnostic samples from anyone in the state of New York. Are they not able to get it CLEP certified? Are they not able to validate it, given what we're hearing about the differences between these two diagnostic methods, or something else? I don't know. Genova Diagnostics is not particularly cooperative in trying to understand this process. They are very determined to only speak with clinicians, so when I've called to talk to them, they will not speak with me. I tried telling them I was Dr. Ewaskowitz, but that didn't work. And they're fairly defensive about, we test the lots, we know the lots are fine, we know it's acceptable, and they're not particularly forthcoming in any further information. So this is difficult. This is like a stopping point I can't find a way to get past. And I'm unclear how big of an issue this really is. So there are a few other modalities that are available for testing VOCs in a patient's body. We've talked a lot about the blood testing. That's a direct measurement of the VOC itself. There's urinalysis. This typically will look at the metabolites of the VOCs. And then there's also breath analysis. And this is something that is in research stages right now. You know, we're familiar with it for breathalyzer tests for DUIs and so forth, but it's being expanded to a much larger sort of clinical setting. Okay? So we've talked about the blood. We can look at the urine testing. It's available through Great Plains Laboratory. They're out of Kansas. They look at 172 different toxic chemicals, but that test does include benzene, ethylbenzene, and the xylenes. And it's the detection of the metabolites of this parent compound. It's just a comment. Most of these VOCs are metabolized through the liver. They go through the CYP2E1 oxidation pathway for their metabolism. But because we're looking at the metabolites, the collection vessel, the little pee cup, is likely not going to be a contaminating factor in these results. So that led us to think maybe this might be a better avenue to be able to look at for VOC exposure. They provide a sample report. This is an example off of their website that'll show really what ranges you're in and give a paragraph as far as what it means for that exposure to that chemical. And when you dig around, this test is not available in the state of New York, which means it very likely doesn't have CLEP certification. Now, what I want to make clear here too is just because it isn't CLEP certified doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the test. It could be a very functional, accurate, precise test. What this kind of means to me though is we don't know. And I need to know. And right now, if we've got the state saying, well, I'm not going to accept that result because it doesn't look like it's validated, we need to find a test that's validated so that we can know. Because I'm not going to keep having my son get poked with more needles and peeing in cups and everything else to try and figure this out if none of it's actually going to come to the state and be accepted. The last one is breath testing. I wanted to just briefly mention this one. It's still largely in the research stages. I spoke with Dr. Christina Davis. She's at UC Davis. She's one of many investigators that are working on this type of technology. It's looking at the exhaled breath condensate. I like this idea because it's not invasive, especially when we're looking at a community of people who are interested in doing this type of testing, and especially for so many of us parents that are interested in knowing what the exposure is of our children. Having something that's non-invasive is definitely appealing. There's a lot of metabolomic content that's in that exhaled breath, and a lot of those biomarkers correlate highly with biomarkers from blood and urine. So it's appealing in that respect. It's in the early stages of clinical diagnostic for a lot of different disease states, cystic fibrosis, mycobacteria infection, chronic liver disease, and even as an early stage diagnostic for several different cancers, esophageal, gastric, and lung. So it's appealing. It definitely has an idea there. One thing that I saw on her website, and that was part of what drew me over to speaking with her last week, is this particular article. They have actually used their technology, not on humans, we're not there yet, on dolphins. And they actually used their technology and did this study on the dolphins that were in the Gulf of Mexico during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So that means they've actually used this technology to look at oil and gas exposure, which is not in humans yet, but it's coming. Okay. So the key takeaways that I want you guys to know from today is that the Colorado Department of Public Health did follow up on my report. They took issue with the diagnostic methods for the blood test that I had run with my son, but they didn't offer any alternative. They didn't say, but here, let's do this. It just felt like they said, bam, I'm not going to take that. But then where am I as a mom? Left holding this going, but I have a 6-year-old son with this exposure level. What am I going to do? One thing that we've been finding, many of us here in the community have been looking into this, that there's a possibility the CDPHE can request to use the CDC's labs, which means we can get to the CDC method. So it's validated, so we know the results. Now, the CDC is a research entity. It's not like they're a commercial laboratory, so this is not going to be a come one, come all kind of we'll test anybody kind of thing. It likely will be a subset. I don't know how that'll even get started or how that decision will be made. But we're in the early stages of figuring out who has to request from whom to get this going. Because I think if we go around the corner and we try and move to urine or we try and move to breath, we're introducing a lot of different types of technologies and just confusing the issue. And really what we need to know is, what's the true exposure that we're looking at? There are several different methods, like I just mentioned, but again, I think we need to focus on a validated blood method to be able to understand this. Genova Diagnostics is not CLEP validated. Great Plains Laboratory is not CLEP validated. And the breath testing, at least through Dr. Davis, but through many of these, is still largely in the research phase. So we're not there yet with that one. As for me and my family, we're looking at doing testing. Again, there's an existential kind of process here where I can talk about my son's exposure. But honestly, if this is a chronic air exposure, it's me. It's my husband. It's our neighbors. And it's a bigger problem. And so we really need to understand that. We're looking at what tests can I do? Should I redo the blood test and the urine test on the same day so at least I could try and run my own control? How would I do that? See, you can see the scientist hat comes on sometimes as a way to try and cope with some of this. I can work on educating. I can work on sharing my story. I can work on telling people what I've found through this whole process and what I understand from these different tests. As for my family, we're not looking at moving right now until this is better understood. But it does, and I've been asked that before, will you move? But here's a question, where? And we're just trying to love each other through all of this, because this is hard. And there's days I can cope with it, and there are days I cannot. That tiger is gonna eat me, right? This is not an easy process, but I'll leave you with this one. If you're looking for when is the right time, it's now. This is my son. This is the Erie Skatepark. This is where he spends a lot of his time. He is a wicked good scooter rider. This is 7 wells that are here. You can see the tower. If it's taking your breath away with how close it is to that little scooter guy, it's also got to take your breath away about all these houses that are in the background there too. It's right in the middle of it, 2 of these. These are in completion phases right now. That tower rig has been up since August. I can't believe how long it's taking to finish this completion phase. And I'm ready for that tower to come down, if for anything, so I don't have to look at it anymore. Thank you for listening today. So I think there may be some questions that might be coming up. I went 20 seconds long.
If you have a question, please fill out a card and hold it up so they can be collected.
I'll also be here for the full day, so that's an option too if we aren't able to get to some of these questions.
And we're a little short on time to start the next session, so we probably will just be able to take a couple questions now.
Absolutely.
So we're going to have Doug go through these.
Okay.
I want to pick a couple to answer so that he can.
Also, while we're talking about questions, my wife emailed me a story from the Fort Collins, Colorado, and this morning, 52 new permits for fracking wells in Larimer County have just gone into review. So it's happening fast. Do you have some cards?
I do.
Great, thank you.
The first one is, it must be difficult having those blood test results and not knowing what to make of it just yet. What are you doing for your family while you work through all of these testing questions? And that's a good question. One thing that I have done is I have a whole house air purification unit that I had placed in the home. It actually is on our 2nd floor so that it is in closest proximity to all of our bedrooms. And there are many purification units out there. There are very few that will also process and filter out VOCs. So the one that we have in our house filters out VOC. And my hope is, because what you're looking at here is a chronic exposure situation. Acute exposure to benzene, your body will process that out in 24 to 36 hours. So if you get a whiff of that, 36 hours later, it's gone. Well, if you're able to capture this in a blood test on a 6-year-old on a Monday morning, you're probably looking more at a chronic setting, where every day it comes in, your body metabolizes it out, but the next day more came in. So my goal is at least having that air purification unit in the house, that I can at least know that when we're all home and overnight, we're in a clean environment that's giving our bodies a chance to be able to metabolize this and clear it. So gone are the days of throwing open all the windows and letting the cool air come in and everything else. The house stays sealed, and when we're all in after school and everything else, and that house is closed in, at least I know that the air inside is clean, and that will at least help us and our bodies process what's possibly there until I can really find out and make more sense of what these test results actually mean. So I think we'll go through the rest of the questions that were all submitted. There was a lot of them. Thank you for all of your questions. We'll find a time to be able to answer a lot of those, and I also will be here throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.